Hi, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on creating a gender-inclusive podcast on a shoestring budget. This was originally invited to be presented at PodFest and will be, but this is a longer version of the same presentation because we just have way too much content to fit into half an hour.
It's true.
And who are we? So I am Evan Tess Murray. I use he or they pronouns, and I'm the creator of This Planet Needs a Name, the co-creator of Light Hearts, and do a lot of different things in audio drama, mostly as a writer and director, although you might also hear my voice in some things, and it's not like I've never attempted sound design. I'm just not nearly as good at it as some of my colleagues. In general, if you're interested in hearing my work, my shows are largely either written or co-written by me. And then I also have pieces in some anthologies, including Monkey Tales and upcoming piece in Someone Dies in This Elevator. And I give talks on subjects involving marginalization and specifically queer identities fairly often. And my co-presenter today is my friend Tal.
Hello, I'm Tal Munir. I use they, them pronouns. I make a number of audio dramas, including side questing. I'm co-produced Light Hearts with Evan and Caro. I'm also making Someone Dies in This Elevator, a spoiler-driven anthology series, as well as a show called What Will Be Here, and many, many more on the back burner. I wear all the hats. I really like producing, voice acting, sound design. I also do some writing, and whatever I need to do to make my podcast.
That's fair. We are both independent producers who came at this, I think both of us because we loved this art form and medium and wanted to be part of it, which means, at least originally, you really do wear all the hats at once. And I think in both of our cases, we have developed specializations, things that I'm better at some things than others, but we're both pretty used to doing whatever needs to be done.
Yep. All the things.
All the things, always. So these were two separate pitches. I was going to talk about writing queer inclusive or gender inclusive characters and what that looks like to create audio dramas that include trans people. Tal was going to talk about creating audio drama on a shoestring budget, how to get started, basically. And it was sort of requested that we combine them. And originally that was kind of an awkward thought, like, okay, I want to. I love working with Tal. We work together a lot, and the opportunity to collaborate was exciting, but the connection wasn't immediately apparent. Where I landed on this, though, is that we really want there to be more marginalized stories out there. We want creators to be able to tell our own stories, and there are a lot more barriers. Like there are even more barriers for marginalized creators than there are for other creators at accessing things like funding and resources. So when we say we want you to be able to tell your own stories, part of that is, and here are the tools you might need to get started. Does that make sense to you, Tal?
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So I'll be covering sort of a little bit more of the how to write and create from a gender inclusive perspective. And we're specifically talking about queerness, essentially, because like that's what I'm talking about, because that's the aspect of marginalization I best represent. Most of these concepts actually work pretty well, no matter what population you're trying to include, kind of expand the ideas. So we might touch on a little bit of that here and there as well. So one of the first things that happens when someone wants to talk to me about doing a gender inclusive something is they've usually already written it. And Tal and I both do a lot of work trying to help people write gender inclusive casting calls and things like that. But I always want to ask people to take a step back and consider gender diversity from the start when you're first writing your script or when you're first coming up with your idea. Because people use the gender of characters essentially as a crutch. It's very lazy. You think this character is a mom because to you, mom is a thing that has a lot of things involved in it that you think people will understand quickly. You won't have to explain that this is a nurturing person who wants to feed everybody. Fine, you can write that character, but by making that character mom and female and feminine, you're essentially writing a fairly lazy and flat character. You're going with something that is an easy shortcut instead of thinking about why your character is that way or who they really are. So my challenge to you is don't think about the gender of your character at all unless there's a reason for it. That doesn't mean your characters can't have a gender. It means that you don't gender them by default. You think through why they are who they are. And this goes for transgender characters, cisgender characters, all of that. So if I'm writing, and I have a couple of examples from my own work, including one that I play who is a woman, even though I am not, because she as a character is a sarcastic bastard and an engineer. And those are traits that men are allowed to have that generally women aren't. And I think it's more interesting to show some representation where women get to be things that in general society doesn't love them to be. The same for one of the leader characters in This Planet Needs a Name is specifically a woman so that she can be a woman in a position of leadership who is both soft and strong. And that role would be a very different role or have a different meaning if she were not a woman. So it doesn't mean your characters can't have a gender. It means that you should make sure that whatever that gender is because it suits the character's story or personality, and that you're not just starting from this is a boy, this is a girl, or this is a non-binary person, that you're starting from a place of this character is telling this part of this story and then going from there. You'll probably end up with a bunch of characters as you conceptualize where their gender identity and whether they're cis or trans and whether they are straight or queer of some kind is not that important compared to the fact that they are curious, risk-taking, fun-loving, and occasionally make stupid decisions, or whatever it is that is the sum total of your character. And as you write, those other things are what make people feel well-rounded, far more than whether we can hang a particular gender label on them. Probably the biggest piece of feedback I get on my writing, well, there's two. One is you made me cry again. But the other one is that the characters I create feel like people, and that people feel like they could have dinner with them or meet them or like they're friends. And that's really deliberate. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And part of that is just creating them from the ground up as well-rounded people. And some of that is not using things like gender or ethnicity or ability, not using those as shortcuts on the way, which also helps avoid a lot of stereotypes. And then that also allows us, this next piece, writing characters with a flexible gender. And we'll get into casting in a minute, which is where you put this into effect. But there are a couple of different approaches here. If you've created your characters and only a few of them are either gendered or have those identities built into the story, and a lot of them don't, and you could easily adapt them in any direction, there's a couple of choices. One that I love doing but isn't always the best answer is to collaborate with your actors, tailor the characters to actors' identities or actors' choices, and then write as you go. The reason this isn't always a good idea is it will slow you down a great deal. It's not always a lot of the time, most of the time, it's better to have things written before you start. So this can be a really more complicated way of doing things that isn't necessarily going to work for every group or every show. I really enjoy it. So it really depends on the group you're working with, whether you're working within a network, what kind of schedule you need to be able to keep. But if you can do it, it's a pretty cool way of doing things. On This Planet Needs a Name, that's what I did. Most of the characters, the first question I asked the actor was like, essentially, here's what I know about the character I'd like you to play. What aspects of your own identity would you like to bring into that character? And then we would talk that through. So they could let me know what gender they'd like to play, what other aspects of identity made sense. And then I helped with them figure out how to make that read. How to make a character Black in an audio medium, which is a really fun challenge. How to make sure that various kinds of queerness read. Those writing challenges were things that I worked out with the actors. And it's a really cool process, and one that means that my actors are really committed to this show. But like I said, it means we're slow. I am writing as we go. We release every couple of months, which is not really what we were hoping to be able to do. The other piece that will work better for most folks is pre-scripting, but with a lot of flexibility. You've got it scripted, you know who your characters are, but you have left out a few key details with the assumption that you will be able to tailor them. So maybe, and this is particularly good when it comes to the gender of characters, because the vast majority of the time, the gender of a character has very little to do with all of their everyday interactions and their personality. Anyone of any gender can be an asshole. Anyone of any gender can be nurturing. Those things are not necessarily gendered traits. So you can leave those open, cast people and ask them, what pronoun do you want us to use for this character? Edit your script and possibly not have to do anything other than that to make the character fit. You can do that for other identities as well, but it tends to be a little bit more complex. Like, you want to make sure that you're writing those identities well. So if you cast somebody into a role and they would rather, like, it's an open casting role, but they're a person of color and they'd like to play this character in line with that identity, you're going to want to rework the character to make sure that it comes through well and respectfully. But when it comes to gender identity, a fair chunk of the time, you don't have to do anything but change a few pronouns and gendered words. And that's true whether you include non-binary characters. When we're talking about casual gender inclusion and casual representation, which is really what I'm talking about here, if you cast me to play a man, you don't really have to tell anybody that you've done that. My voice will read kind of unusual for a cis man, and people will notice that. And you can use he pronouns for me, and you've taken a step towards saying, hey, some men can sound like this, without having to do any particularly huge amounts of work to make that happen. These are both ways of doing essentially casual representation, which is what I'm using to mean, hey, trans people, queer people, lots of different kinds of people exist in your world. Please put them in the world of your script as well. This is not about writing stories that focus on being trans or focus on being queer. Those are things that, if you're going to make that the story or that the pivotal point of a character, it's vastly preferred that that be something you've either experienced or that you're working closely with someone who has. Not because you can't write those stories if you haven't experienced them, but because almost everyone does it very badly. So the strong preference here is that you make sure that if you're trying to directly tell a story about what it is to be trans, that you be trans or be working very closely with someone who is, to make sure that you're doing a pretty good job representing that. I like to say, just cis people, please don't write trans pain. It's all most cis people like to write about, and those stories are just not yours, they're ours. I'm not going after anybody for this, and I'm not asking anyone to out themselves. This is for you as a writer. Please consider whether or not a story is something you should be telling. But that said, please include us. Please find ways to include these characters and find ways to include us as actors. And speaking of including us as actors, I want to turn this next bit over to Tal.
Yeah, so you've written yourself some gender diverse characters. Great job. The next question you might have is, well, how do I find actors for these characters? And I'm going to give you 2 points up front. I've even bolded them in my slide. If you are cis, please do not cast cis people in trans roles. If you are white, please do not cast white people as your characters of color. These are very easy things for you to do, and you should follow them, basically. But within your casting call itself, it's important to describe your queer and trans characters respectfully. Avoid having stereotypes, like calling a gay male character flamboyant. Avoid misgendering. Don't say, oh, this character is a trans woman, and then refer to her as he in your casting call at any point. Also, don't dead name your characters in the casting call. Dead naming is something that should never be done lightly. And when I'm reading a casting call for a trans character, if you say, oh, his name used to be this, I'm gonna click out of your casting call, because that's not information that's necessary, and it shows that you don't, that in your script and just in even you're interacting with your trans actors, you don't value dead naming as something that should ideally never be done, but in your script, if it occurs, be done very carefully. And once you've cast people, you should listen when, oh, actually, even before you've cast people, you should listen when actors tell you that there are issues in your call. It's okay to mess up. Everyone messes up at different points. But if someone comes to you and says, hey, by the way, you've done this thing in your call and it's kind of a red flag for me, you should listen. You shouldn't brush them off and say, well, I know what I'm doing. This is how I want to do it. Don't dig a deeper hole. Like if someone approaches you to let you know that they see an issue in your call, that's them in a way trusting you to, like, they care enough to tell you that you've messed up. They want you to do better. Don't take that reaching out and just like slap them back in the face. I once had, Evan was there, a multi-hour discussion in a Discord server about a casting call that had a non-binary character that was badly described and also open casting. And me and several other people was trying to explain why we found it insulting that this call was open to anyone to apply, or like why this character was described in such a way. And it ended up with that channel being locked down. And now I know who I will audition for. Like it's as simple as that. Like if you want to dig your hole deeper, that's on you, and people just won't audition, and like that's on them. It's important to use inviting language in your casting call, and also follow it. Don't just say, oh, we invite trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming people to audition for any character they'd feel comfortable playing, and then only cast them in binary roles. Like, oh, this person sounds like a man, so I'm not gonna cast them in any role where the character uses she, her pronouns. Like if you're going to invite people to audition for characters they feel comfortable playing, it is important that you'll actually cast them in roles that they feel comfortable playing. It's also important to cast for vocal diversity without gendering voices by pitch. Voices don't have a gender. A masculine voice can sound like anything. A feminine voice can sound like anything. Men have voices of all different pitches, as do women, as do non-binary people. So when you're describing the pitch of your character, don't just say like, oh, she sounds like a woman, or she has a feminine voice. Because what does that mean? That means nothing. And it's important to think about these things. Think about what you want. Of course, no one wants all their characters in their audio drama to sound the same, but there are ways to cast for vocal diversity and have characters that all sound different without doing it along weird gendered lines. Yeah, so I guess in summary, just do things with intention. Don't just follow stereotypes. When you write a description for your character, think about what you want and think about how you're going to describe it, and follow it.
I love that because I have noped out of so many auditions because they say LGBTQ people are encouraged to read, but then don't have a statement about who I should read for. And I am transmasculine. Unless I'm writing them, I don't play women. And I have a really hard time wanting to put any energy into a casting call if I think you're just going to ignore me because I don't sound like what you think men sound like. And some of those creators probably would have considered me, but they didn't make that obvious. So, there's no reason to put any energy into that. And I do want to say, This Planet Needs a Name is, I think we're like 80% trans in terms of the ensemble at this point. And people's voices are kind of all over the place, and audiences will roll with it. It's not, you can trust your audience to figure out what's going on. You give them the cues that they need to understand who people are. That cue does not have to be the pitch of a voice. So, and there's also a piece I left out of the writing that I should have mentioned as soon as Tal mentioned dead naming, because I didn't even think of it. But if you are writing trans characters, don't even invent their dead name. Just don't. It's not important to who they are now.
Read it.
You don't need it. My trans characters in my shows, I don't know their dead names because we will never mention it and it is not important. So
yes. You mentioned the cast for this planet needs a name. Along similar lines, for Someone Dies in This Elevator, we had a bulk of our characters were just open casting. They didn't have a gender until we had an actor. Some of them were specific, but I made a point to be clear during the casting process that we wanted trans and non-binary people to audition as they wanted to. And at the end of the day, our cast is about 50% trans and non-binary. For a show that I don't think any episode touches on the trans or non-binary experience in any way. It's a show about people dying in elevators. In case that wasn't obvious by the name. And, you know, that's just how our cast ended up.
Yeah, every episode of that I'm involved in any way is absolutely, yeah. I guess the piece we do here sometimes is I'm afraid to write a trans role because what if I can't find a trans actor? And you can, I promise. There's plenty
of
us.
Easy. I promise you. There are so many extraordinarily talented trans and non-binary voice actors out there, and they are not difficult to find. Post about it on Twitter. You'll get at least 50 retweets for your casting call tweet and a good number of auditions. It'll be great.
And in general, if you can't reach trans or non-binary voice actors or actors of color, then there's something wrong with the way that you're writing your casting call, because if there's evidence in your call that you're going to be inclusive and that you've been thoughtful about it, everyone's going to be excited and is going to share that within those networks. So if your call is not being shared in those networks, it's a really great time to reconsider how you're structuring things, how you've communicated. Yeah, even if you in your head have great thoughts about how to do it all, if you haven't used language that invites trust, you might not be able to reach people who would otherwise be pretty excited. You're looking at two of the people who share those calls within our networks.
Yep. All right. So I think we've touched on how to cast your gender diverse characters. And now Evan is going to talk about how to work with those actors.
I bolded "you'll need to earn trust and here's how" because I feel like it's the piece that particularly folks who don't share marginalization sometimes don't get, which is that we are used to being treated pretty badly, even by well-meaning people, and are often waiting for that. You know, we don't really have a reason to trust that someone from outside the community is going to be able to be respectful or going to choose to be respectful. And that's true for most axes of marginalization. I am frequently a white person working with people of color. And part of that is that I get to earn people's trust because they've been treated like crap by white people, and I am one. And that's fine. So I say it up front because I want you to know that if people don't come in trusting you, it's because of past experiences that don't necessarily have anything to do with you, but that you do have to deal with. Taking that personally is a really good way to not earn trust. But if you stick it out and you are making good, genuine attempts to not be a jerk, generally that's really all it takes, is understanding that you're going to need to take some steps to genuinely deserve people's trust. And that if you do that, you'll earn it. And then people will continue to want to work with you. And your personal networks will be full of folks from all different kinds of backgrounds who have decided that you're good to work with. Like, this is not impossible to do. It takes some effort. When it comes to working with actors who are trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming, be really specific. This is a tiny thing, but when you ask about names and pronouns, ask about what they want for public use as well as what they'd like you to call them in private. That's a really small detail, but it's essentially exactly the same as asking, how do you want me to credit you, right? You're saying, what is your credit name? What are your credit pronouns? Because those really might be different. I go by Evan Tess Murray. Privately, I'm mostly just Evan or Ev. I use he and they pronouns. Most of my close friends use they for me. for me, those aren't radically different things, but my public credits are different from my private identity. And for some people, those things will be very different. And using the pronouns someone uses with friends as part of their public credits, publicizing that, you could very well be outing them in a way that they are not prepared for, that they have not consented to, which is a really good way to not just not earn their trust, but earn their distrust and all the rest of our distrust while you're at it. That can also put someone in an unsafe situation. When people are not out, there are usually reasons, ranging from worries about losing jobs or family rejection. It's not just what I'm comfortable or not comfortable with. We are living in a world that's hostile to us. And our attempts to navigate that world are things that you really need to respect. The second one, never alter voice pitch without consent, or I put or at all. And we've talked about this, and if you're turning someone into a monster, whatever, obviously talk to them about it, make sure they know what you're doing to their voice. And there's all kinds of things you can do with that are fun and interesting. But if you're altering voice pitch to change perceived gender or age, which kind of hits that same space, then a lot of the time, what you are about to do is potentially extremely dysphoric for the trans person in question. This would be for me. Most of us, I think, maybe not most, tons of us, however, have voice dysphoria. We hear how we sound, we know how we sound. And in my case, I love how I sound, but I don't love what it makes other people assume about me. And if you were to raise the pitch of my voice, that would be deeply uncomfortable. If you're to lower the pitch of my voice, that would be deeply uncomfortable. I might be okay with them if you ask first. I don't know. And I feel like I'm not unusual in this. And in particular, if you were to do something to the pitch of my voice and I didn't know that and I heard it, that is something that, for some of us would be like, yay, now I get to go talk about this with my therapist. These are serious things that we deal with every day. Gender dysphoria is not small. If it was easy to deal with, we wouldn't need things like hormones and surgery so often. They're big concerns in people's lives. So essentially, cast us for our voices, enjoy our voices, and don't fuck with our voices without asking. When we just went into respectful language in casting documents, if you want to earn trust, use that respectful language at all times, backstage, in conversations that you don't think any trans or gender nonconforming people are in. Don't just use non-gendered language when you think we're in the room. Surprise, we might be in the room and you don't know that. It's actually fairly common. And in addition to that, there are folks who are cis people who care deeply about us. And if you use gendered language unnecessarily, for example, or if you misgender people when they're not there, there's plenty of cis folks who will also not trust you anymore and who will tell us not to trust you anymore. Essentially, this means when we say use respectful language, we mean change the way that you think so that you're using respectful thoughts and the language will follow. And don't just do it in your public-facing documents. It becomes really obvious to us pretty quickly if you've picked up some boilerplate inclusive language, but in the way that you actually speak about gender, you haven't really thought about it. If you say if you just have habits involving saying things like ladies and gentlemen, then we don't care how often you say that you include non-binary people because you clearly haven't really thought about that very hard. And it's little things like that that are obvious to us that will make it a lot harder for you to earn our trust. It doesn't mean that we're going to hate you if you haven't changed all of your habits of speech overnight, because that's not true. It does mean that we can tell the difference between genuine effort and no effort pretty easily. And if you are doing no effort, yeah, we really can tell. If you have genuine effort going on, most of the time people are pretty patient. If you don't, we're not, or not always. Have clear policies about inclusion that everyone on the show is aware of. This is particularly important for inclusion of identities you don't own. So most queer folks have reasons to trust me because of my own identity. People of color don't. It's really, really useful to have written down somewhere. And this is something I am not always good about as a sort of hobbyist who threw things together without much thought originally, but that moving forward, I am going to be, it's really good to have written down somewhere what your policy, your show's policy is about identity inclusion and about respect for people's identities, and then also about how you'll handle it if there are concerns about that. It doesn't have to be some kind of punitive policy, but it should be somewhere, it should be in writing, and it should be something people can refer to if they have some kind of a concern. Hopefully they won't. And in a lot of cases, they won't, depending on the show, depending on the situation. A lot of times things go great. Having it down, it helps people trust that you've thought about it and that you know that problems are possible and that you're prepared to handle them if they come up, which lets people trust you. And then I have check-in regularly with actors. So this is, I mean, hopefully, if you're a director, producer, if you're a creator, then even though we tend to have pretty loose hierarchies, you are still in charge of a bunch of actors. And some of them are going to be a lot more comfortable telling you you've screwed up than others are. And making space for that conversation is really, really important. Have kind of a really early on in This Planet Needs a Name, we have lots of different like ethnic identities and backgrounds, cultural backgrounds going on with characters that are things that the actors share, but that I frequently don't. And so I'm kind of like scrambling to figure out how to effectively write a character who has knowledge and stuff that I don't have. A lot of the time I just put like insert folksy Southern saying here in the script for the actor to fill in. But early on, I was trying to figure out how to say something in Yiddish, and I definitely picked the wrong Yiddish. And my actor, who didn't know me all that well yet, had to say, is that really what you want to say? Because I think it probably isn't. And they said that. And I was like, yeah, maybe not. Here's what I'm trying to say. And then they were like, how about we do it this way? And we did. And that was fine. But if they hadn't felt like they could say that to me and have me go like, yeah, I'm listening, then that conversation might not have happened. And we might have had the character saying something we did not want them to be saying, or otherwise provided not amazing Jewish rep. And in that case, like it worked out, but I had not been as deliberate about making sure that the actors knew like I was open to that critical feedback yet. And that interaction is the one that made me go, oh, I need to be saying to my actors, please let me know if anything in this character doesn't ring true to you. Please let me know if there's a way that I'm talking to or about you that isn't working for you. I will genuinely listen. I'm honestly open to that. I really appreciate that feedback. That said, I am constantly saying like casting people who share an identity is important. If you're leaning on them really hard to help make sure that you're representing their identity well, if they're doing co-writing, you know, my actors, I give them a great deal of control over their lines. They can reword things if it sounds better to them or fits a dialect better. If you're doing that, pay them more or credit them differently, or in some other way, make it clear that they aren't just showing up and reading some lines. They are a collaborator in a deeper way. And you're going to acknowledge that, you're going to credit them, you're going to make sure folks know about that. And the reason I emphasize that so much is that can end up being a lot of labor. And if you're not crediting it, then they're not really getting anything out of it, except that, I mean, it feels nice to be respected, but that's not enough to value the extra work that they're putting in compared to somebody who is reading the lines as written and not sitting there and thinking like, okay, is this the way I think that this character should best represent people in my community, which is a lot of extra work. So all of that is kind of like when you're working with us as actors, I'm specifically talking about transgender, queer, non-binary, gender non-conforming folks here, people where gender identity probably doesn't match up with whatever folks assigned us at birth or whatever folks think when they look at us. But the same thing will apply to working with members of most marginalized groups, just sort of in general. Make sure that you pay attention to how to be respectful to folks within that group, that you're listening, that you make it really clear that you're open to those conversations, that you can have them without being defensive, and that you're willing to change the way you represent characters if somebody points out that the way you're doing it isn't working. None of that is hard. This is genuinely a pretty solvable problem, but it does require you to check your ego at the door, understand you don't know everything, and be open to learning from folks. Yeah. What do you think, Tal? Did I cover it?
Yeah, I think you got it.
Oh, and be
feel very
prepared.
strongly.
Sorry, I was gonna say,
Go
be
ahead.
prepared to re-record your audio credits if somebody's name changes, period.
Oh, let me show you what I have in this next slide for you.
I kind of thought that might be in this next one.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel strongly about never alter voice pitch without consent, because you think, yeah, okay, that's maybe a weird thing to do. It's happened to me twice where I've gone to listen to a piece I've done voice acting for, and they pitched my voice up, and I could not listen to it, period. I had to just click out of there.
I was
don't
talking to you during one of those. Like, yeah, I was the person who was online when you had that experience and were suddenly, and I know that it was upsetting. You want to be able to listen to the show that you're in.
Yeah. I like podcasts.
What a thought.
I want to listen to them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but back on script, so to speak here. Yeah, when it comes to crediting your actors, consider crediting them in the show notes, on your website, and in the audio. And if you're crediting them in the audio, you should be willing to re-record those credits if the actor's name changes. I know for most hosting platforms, at least all the ones I've used, they make it extraordinarily easy to just swap out the audio of episodes already uploaded. And I've only done this once or twice, but I know from experience, it is extraordinarily easy to spend 5 minutes re-recording credits and then spend 5 more minutes swapping them in, and then spend 3 minutes changing out the audio. Yeah, okay, it's annoying, sure, but it's really important to do, and it's not very difficult. And likewise, if an actor's name changes, change their credits in the show notes, change their credits on the website. For pronouns, sometimes someone will just start going with different pronouns and not change their name. Update what you have. I've done this loads of times at this point, because I have across the first 2 seasons of side questing, I have about 50 actors, and it's been a handful of times where they won't even go to me. I'm friends with people, and I'm like, oh, I see that their pronouns have changed, so I'll go to my website and I'll update them, and I'll go to the episode and I'll update it, and it's fine. Yeah, and speaking of pronouns, consider including pronouns in the show notes or on the website, so that when people are talking about the actors in your show, they know how to refer to them. I'd say consider, because sometimes there are people who might not want to have their pronouns by their name, who are still like kind of figuring it out, and they want that to be left in the open. And respect that. Don't ever enforce pronouns upon someone. And when you credit people on your website, I wrote, consider linking to their own website or social media so that they can be contacted. As a frequent casting director of my own shows, sometimes I hear someone in an audio drama and I'm like, I love this voice, I love this acting, let me go hunt this person down. And I love it when shows have links to that person's Twitter or website on their own show website, because it makes hunting them down so much easier. Credits are important, especially in unpaid productions.
There are definitely audience members. Before I was a creator, I did this all the time. I would love an actor's voice, and I would just want to find out who they were so I could find all the other shows they were in. And so that's another piece, like not even just for your audience's sake, like we follow the actors that we like from show to show, and that's how we discover new projects.
Yes. And once you've got your actors credited, how do you market your show, you might ask? This more relates to promoting a show when you don't have any budget and less about creating a gender diverse show. But there are lots of free tools to market your show and bring listeners in. You should have a show website to credit your actors on, to host your press kit, to link your transcripts. Please, please, please have a show website. It doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to be useful. I love Card with 2 R's. It's where I do all my websites on. Card has a free plan that will get you a website that will end in .card.co, and will let you put, I think it's up to 100 elements, AKA bits of information on your website. And that's enough to have a press kit, have your transcripts, talk about your cast, talk about your show. There's also WordPress, Wix, Tumblr, are all things I've seen used, but haven't used personally. But again, there are lots of options out there and they don't need to be fancy. I recommend make graphics for your show. I realize that it's an audio medium, but that's really difficult to promote on social media. You can link to your show all you want on Twitter, but it's also helpful to have graphics that people can see as they scroll instead of something they have to click and play. I love Canva so much. I make so many graphics in there. I like to make mood boards for episodes. I like to make just art for episodes. I like to make graphics for my cast, casting announcements, or just when I am looking to cast someone, I made a little graphic for each character in the casting call. And I was like, this is about them, come audition. It's great to have visuals for your audio show. And you can get images for those graphics on places like Unsplash, Plexus, Flickr Comments. Don't use copyrighted images to promote your show. That will get you in hot water. It's not guaranteed, but it might. Use public domain images, use stuff you have the rights to. And another great way to promote your show is little video clips. I use Headliner, other people use Adobe Spark, where you can take a clip from your trailer, from your episode, maybe even you talking about your show. It doesn't have to be audio on your feed. And you can add captions. You can add a little waveform that will wiggle as you talk. And you can make little short videos to put on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook that will give people a little taste of what you have going on. Because if you've made a really great show, that's part one. Part two is getting people to listen. And even if you don't have a marketing budget, as long as you have a little bit of time, you can get some of that going. I'm very bad at marketing my show. It's the thing I'm worst at, but I'm trying. I'm trying to put my social media hat on and make some pretty graphics and be like, listen to the thing I made.
They say they're bad at it, but the Someone Dies in This Elevator marketing is actually quite brilliant. So,
oh, thank you.
And clever and fun. But if you want an example of a show that uses the social media marketing amazingly well, check out Lessa's Morgue. Their social media marketing stuff is absolutely brilliant. There's lots of other folks who are good at it, but they're the best.
All right. So, oh no, spoilers.
Oh.
We're gonna talk about how we've done this in our shows. We've already touched on this a little bit, but we're gonna get a little bit more into specifics about how the both of us have created our gender inclusive podcast with very little budget or none. So we've both used a number of free and or cheap tools to make our shows. I've kind of summarized a bunch of options here. I love using Trello for organization because you can have lists and cards and drag them from one to another and do all sorts of things. And as someone with a terrible memory, producing too many shows for my own good, Trello is often a lifesaver. I like using Discord to communicate with my cast, get everyone in one place, and you can make channels to post information. You can have Q&A. You can put, here's how to pronounce character names in Discord, and it's very helpful. And you can also make community Discords. I think Evan is the one who should probably talk about that. But in addition to your cast, you can just also invite listeners of your show into your Discord. Slack is another kind of communication platform that I don't have much experience using, but I have popped on every now and then.
It works a lot like Discord, but in a lot of ways, but it's just sort of oriented more toward business enterprise solutions and less toward like gamers in terms of where it started. So I like Discord for podcasting because I use Slack for work.
Do you want to touch on the This Planet Needs a Name Discord while we're here?
Sure. Because Discord is, I think having a Discord or similar server for as your production space is incredibly helpful. So I love it. But from the start, we knew that This Planet Needs a Name would be kind of community driven and invitational. That was sort of the brand we went for. So we decided to make a public half of a server as well as a private half from the start. And then just sort of slowly invite folks into the public part of it and let that grow. With the end result that we still use it as our production server. We still have the cast end of things in the back, like essentially backstage. But then the public portion of the server is actually pretty, I don't know, I think we have 250 people and probably—
Good number.
Yeah, probably 40 or so of them are active at any given time, and 10 or so are actually talking. It's fairly busy and high. I guess it's really just about high engagement because that was what we wanted to do. And so that's a piece where we're using Discord two ways. Even if no one had signed up or wanted to be part of the public part of the server, the fan server, we were using it for production anyway. So it wasn't like additional effort. It wasn't that much of a big deal to set it up both ways. And then as we promoted and people started to use it, it became a little bit more of a thing to manage. I gave a whole talk on community management actually a little while ago. And I'm happy to talk about that another time. But as a free tool, it's pretty good. One of the biggest limitations of Discord is we're all in about 80 of them at this point. So it can be a little bit of a trick to juggle. I think, Tal, you run 10 Discord servers?
I run too many. 10 sounds like the right number.
I run 2. But yeah, I think having that online space that can be for your cast is really valuable. If it can also be, if you want it to also be a community space, that is something that it can do. And we do it for Light Hearts as well, just in a quieter way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as writing goes, I do all my writing in Google Docs because it's free and easy to use, and I'm not so invested in a proper script format. Celtx is another, I think, free option if you want to get more in a scripty format. I use Google Docs. There are other cheap options that aren't free but not super expensive. I know of Writer Duet. Evan, what do you use?
I use Scrivener, which is $50, so it's not cheap. For me, I write a lot and I write fast when I'm actually writing. And so Scrivener's auto formatting is what lets me type fast enough to keep up with my brain. And so I'm a lot slower when I'm writing in Google Docs and I have to type out character names and space. Like the formatting of it is hard for me. But Google Docs is how I collaborate when I work collaboratively with people, because they have fabulous collaboration abilities, like sharing and being able to write simultaneously in the same document, which we're all kind of used to because of Google Docs, didn't used to be a thing. So it's really, it's honestly pretty well the standard because of that. And I think that's great.
Yeah. Speaking of collaboration, for video calls, great for remote recording, great for group meetings. My favorites are Google Meet and Discord. I like to use Discord when I already have everyone in a Discord server. You can hop in a voice channel. If people want video, they can turn on video, and that can be super great and convenient. And there's also Discord bots to record Discord calls. I wouldn't recommend depending on those bots for your podcast audio, but they can be great as backups. And you know, they're usable. I like Google Meet because they have auto captions and it's free. Auto captions are a great accessibility feature. And I like to have them. I wish Discord had them. Zoom has 40 minutes free. I try not to use Zoom because there's a lot going on insofar as privacy with Zoom that I don't totally trust. But it can be helpful. We're on a Zoom call right now.
I have the paid version of Zoom for professional reasons, so it makes a lot of sense for me, but it's $15 a month, and that's not something that is necessarily going to be on a shoestring budget. And I think Google Meet works just as well. In my case, I'm using it for work anyway, and it's the tool that I am most comfortable and proficient with. So that's what I use. Yeah. But yeah, I'd say relying on Discord for recording is probably the only thing you really don't want to do, but it's fine for most conversations. And the accessibility features of being able to do AI captioning, like AI captioning isn't amazing, but it's better than not having any captioning at all for like this kind of thing, where especially if we're just having a meeting and there's somebody there who's deaf or hard of hearing. I'm probably not going to be able to bring in a captioner for a one-on-one meeting, but the AI captions might be helpful. And so Google Meet does do that, and that's a pretty good step.
Yeah. And once you've got your audio, hopefully not recorded via Discord bot, there are a couple of free audio editing programs, not programmers. I started with Audacity. I feel like Audacity gets a lot of grief, but it is incredibly functional as a program. You can record through Audacity. You can have multiple tracks. You can do a couple of noise reduction. I'm blanking on the word you use to make your audio sound good, but here we are.
In Audacity, it's called noise reduction.
It's noise reduction. There's also other stuff you can do, and it's honestly, for a free program, it's pretty powerful. My issues with Audacity were when I started getting really into sound design, I would have 20 to 40 tracks, and Audacity started getting really mad at me and being slow and occasionally crashing. Mm-hmm. So it does have its limits, especially when you're making an audio drama with full soundscapes and action sound design. But if you're not having 40 tracks, you can do a lot with Audacity, and it's free. There's also Reaper, which I have on my computer but haven't used, which is, I would say, slightly more powerful audio editing program. You can do so much with Reaper that you can't do with Audacity. I believe it's $60, but they have a free trial that you can kind of just use. So I would say if you can afford Reaper, please give them your money. But if you're, still trying to figure out, is Reaper what I want to use? How do I make this work for me? You can check it out for as long as you need to. And I think that's really great.
I know a lot of folks who really do use Reaper and not end up shelling out for any of because there are like higher end programs out there. I have both Audacity and Reaper, but since most of what I'm doing is just like cleaning up a vocal track or something, I can do that, generally speaking, in Audacity just as easily, using the same plugins. So it's not a different process.
Yeah. And speaking of plugins, you're making this really easy for me, Evan.
Like
there's a free plugin called Levelator, which you can use to get your tracks on the same volume. I tend to use it when I've got more of like a talk show going, not an audio drama where I want my 2 or 3 people speaking to not sound at vastly different volumes. But you just drop them in and it levels it for you, which can be useful. There's also the occasional cheap plugin. I love Isotope RX, which is in and of itself not cheap, but they do frequently have sales where you can get it for, I think, sometimes as low as $30. And it has saved my butt so many times.
I think I actually grabbed some Isotope plugins for less than $10 once. You just kind of have to keep an eye because they do them regularly, and especially like right when they released RX8, they gave a radical discount on RX7, which are perfectly good plugins. So yeah,
yeah, highly recommend getting your hands on Isotope RX. Pick a number. If you're doing a audio drama, you'll probably need SFX. Freesound has so many great sounds for free. It's community uploaded, community moderated. A lot of the stuff on Freesound is not very good, but also a lot of it is very good and very useful. I frequently do a lot of my own Foley, and when I can, I like to upload things to Freesound because I download so many things from Freesound to use for my own shows. I like sorting by public domain on Freesound, so I don't have to keep track of who I need to credit, solely because my memory is so bad and I'm terrified I'll forget someone. But you can download public domain sounds from Freesound and modify them, use them however you want, and it works great. There's also the Sonus yearly game pack where they throw gigabytes of SFX just up on a website, and you can download them, and you can download past years, and you can just get random professional SFX to use. And there's no guaranteeing what will be in there, but I've definitely used some of them. And they're all just free to use, no credit required, which is my favorite form of SFX. There's also a website called Zapsplat, which has a lot of free to use sounds. I believe most of these require attribution, but they're all pretty good quality, I would say. So there's a lot of SFX. You don't have to record everything yourself that you want to use. And it works out well. And sort of the tangent to SFX is music. I think it's kind of adjacent there. I'm not a composer. I can maybe whip something together in GarageBand if I need to, but it's not my strength. So I like to find music that I can use in my shows. There's a creator called Loyalty Freak Music, and they upload literally hours of public domain music to their website. And I adore them as a person, and I use so many of their songs in my shows. There's also Free Music Archive, which recently got bought. There's something kind of weird going on with Free Music Archive. They're actually how I found Loyalty Freak Music, through that. So depending on when you watch this video, I'm not sure how usable Free Music Archive will be for you, but it was once an option, and perhaps it still is. And there's also Incompetech, I think I said that right, which is another creator who makes, I believe you need to credit this music, but it's easy enough to credit music. I'm just lazy and forgetful. But it's a lot of stuff you can pull from there. And last but not least, hosting. You need to host your podcast somewhere, probably. I do not recommend hosting it yourself. I did that once. I hand-coded my RSS feed. Never again. So there are a couple of free platforms. Anchor is just free, period. They don't even have a paid plan. Anchor, I think, is really great for people starting off. I started with Pinecast. I used their free plan, which let me have 10 episodes without paying for hosting. And then when I got to episode 11, I started paying $5 a month. I think now it's 10, and I can have as many shows as I want. There's some upload limit, but I cannot podcast that fast, and I have never hit it. So Pinecast is also a cheap option. I know that Castbox has a free plan. I have not personally used it, but it's just another option there for you. Lots of stuff you can use to produce your gender inclusive podcast.
I do
if you
think
need it.
when you're picking a host, like I wound up with a paid host that isn't any of these, but just going, when you're doing that research, it's kind of overwhelming. Ultimately, pick the one with the free plan that will work for your current needs. You can move your show to a new host. It's not hard.
Yeah.
So I think that's the piece. Like, you're just not locked in forever. Pick the one that looks like it might work for now. And if your host goes belly up or does something you don't like, you can switch hosts, and it's just genuinely not that hard to do.
Yeah, I would say it's a little annoying.
I knew at the outset that I was going to be paying a host, and so I went with the host that had the like paid plan that I thought I would want, rather than the host that had the free plan that I thought I would want. But they all work. Like, there's no.
Yeah. They all have their specific pros and cons if you want to get really into the nitty gritty.
Some of them do more SEO or make it easier to list yourself with. There's lots of little details. Feel free to dig into it. But when you're first starting out, just pick one and go with it, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, you can always change. And now we're going to kind of break down into what we did for 3 different shows that we make between the 2 of us. Yeah, kind of just go into what makes these 3 shows different.
Yeah, it's really funny because we're actually talking about them in not in chronological order at all. Lighthearts is the youngest of these 3, but it's our baby. Lighthearts is a hobby show, and I think it's kind of important to say it that way, because when you start a show, it's really good. I'm going to sound like Sarah Ray Werner for a second. Check out their stuff if you haven't. It's important to know what your goals are and how you'd measure success. Like, are you trying to do a professional show that comes out every 2 weeks? Are you trying, like, do you want to sell this? What do you want? And in this case, this was Caro and me, and then we approached Tal and just said, hey, haunted gay bar, and went from there. But it was deliberately from the outset, we said, like, let's do this for fun. Let's do it not on a strict schedule, just whenever we can. We needed something. It was last spring. The whole world needed something lighthearted. And that's how the show happened. We created something together where the point of the show is everything is resolved by the end of the episode. And Caro and I were already talking about that, and we knew Tal from various places, but side questing, which has the same feel. And it just was like, hey, you know who would be great at this? And thus the trio of Seriously Silly Souls was born. So it is self-funded. Or unfunded. Really, Tal's paying for hosting, and the rest of us don't think about it, is I think what's happening there. And someday that could change if Tal says so, and then I'll pay for hosting. We don't think about it very hard.
Side questing is paying for Lighthearts hosting.
At some point, this Planet Needs a Name might pick up. It's right. It's definitely something we're not putting money into. It's unpaid. We don't pay ourselves. We don't pay our guests. We write the main cast for ourselves and chose their gender identities at the outset. Amusingly enough, Tal's the only person playing congruent with their gender identity.
It's true.
The other 2 of us are playing women. I don't even remember why I wanted Ryan to be one, except I like had a very specific old school lesbian in mind, and she just made sense. So
she's also a scientist.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was part of it too, right? Like, I just really do like that rep piece. But Ryan actually is like my deepest register of speaking, and it's really funny because we keep misgendering her in our rehearsals. And yeah, so we write those 3 main casts for ourselves, which means we chose everything about them. And then the show invites guests to come in and the guest star for an episode. We write the episode with and for that person, and they choose the character that they want to play, including all aspects of identity. And we toss around ideas, we write, they have script approval. We don't pay them anything. We do feature them. So the episode title will have their name in it, and they have an opportunity to plug things. And if Lighthearts ever got big, that might be something that had significant value, but that's not really the goal. We wanted to highlight other queer voices, give people a chance to come play with us, really. So guests join us because they're going to enjoy the experience and it's fun. So this is one way of doing a free show, is just making sure that anybody that you ask to come be part of it with you is going to have a really good time and enjoy you and be sort of happy to give what is really, in general, a relatively small amount of their time and energy. However, like Tal's not getting paid for the sound design. Caro and I are basically alternating and co-writing. We're not paying ourselves for the writing. We're doing it because it's fun and enjoyable for us. And I think that's fine. It's not like a business model. This is not the way you do something if you want it to be. This is a hobby, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the side bars of that is that our release schedule is extremely sporadic. I'm 2 months behind on an episode as we record, and I'm really, really sorry, Cole. Thank you for being patient. Because both my day job and other work keep getting in the way of my ability to focus on that script that we need to be writing. And that happens, and like my collaborators know that, and none of us are mad at each other about it. But it does mean that Light Hearts gets put aside occasionally when there's other stuff that we're working on. So there's the downside to doing the completely, quote, free show. I think if we don't value our own time, the entire cost of Light Hearts is hosting. If we, because it's got a free card, right?
Yeah, well, I pay for card so that I can have 10 websites with infinity elements, but I paid for card because I needed it for my personal website.
This is kind of like how I have a professional Zoom that I use for everything, so I use it anyway, and the same deal for web hosting for other stuff. So
I guess technically the hosting is piggybacking on the Pinecast plan that I got for side questing and would be using anyway, and the card is piggybacking on the card plan I got for myself and would be paying for anyway. So anything we pay for Light Hearts, it's getting paid for anyway, so why not?
Right. So. And then our personal, we're essentially donating our own time and effort because we want to work on this together. So,
yeah.
And like, it genuinely is incredibly fun. And I think that our like guest agreement, when we send it out to people, is invitational, makes it nice and clear. Like, you can walk out at any time. This is intended to be pleasant for everybody. But if you ask people to do unpaid work, it's pretty important to me that you make that clear up front and that you explain how they're benefiting. And in this case, it really is like, do you want to come play with us for a little while? It's fun, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And that goes fine. We are not asking more than a couple of hours of work out of anybody to do that. Yeah. And yeah, it ends up with a sporadic release schedule, but that's Light Hearts. I love this project. I know all three of us do, because it ends up being it's the refuge project. When other things are stressful, we can always work on Light Hearts and talk to each other about it. And occasionally people ask us about our collaborative relationship, because the three of us fairly clearly enjoy working together. And it's real. Like, we just genuinely like working together.
There's no secret bickering behind the scenes.
No, part of it, of course, is Caro and I work together on just about everything, but a lot of it is just that we're all people who enjoy collaborative work, which is another subject I've given talks on, is successful collaboration. But it helps if you just start with people who all want to be sharing the space and the credit, and that, like, we're just rarely going to disagree. I can't imagine like thinking I have the right to overrule Tal on a door noise.
Oh, so many door noises. Oh.
If you're new to audio drama, and especially if you don't do sound design, your sound design friends will spend most of their time trying to find doors and footsteps, and complaining about doors and footsteps. And if you're a writer, you will try really hard to write fewer doors and footsteps because you love your sound designers, but you can't, because doors are how you establish people entering spaces and footsteps are how you establish people moving. And so it's very hard not to have them. That's that.
Yes. There was an episode of Light Hearts where people came in and out of our central haunted gay bar 6 times, and one time it was like 4 in a single scene, and it was like, Evan, why did you do this to me?
Hey, I wrote an episode of something else where I actually said the corridor is carpeted because I love you, Tal.
Yes. You make up for the doors.
Anyway, that was lighthearted. Side questing, Tal's project.
Side questing. Side questing is my baby. I produce it alone. I am no longer the sole writer. I now bring on guest writers, but for the first season, it was entirely written by me. I'm the sound designer. I'm the producer. I'm the social media manager. I'm all the hats except some of the voice actors and occasionally some of the writers. Side questing is a low budget production. The first season was just funded from my pocket. I was like, this is my hobby and I have money for a little hobby. I'm at the point now where I get about $50 an episode from Patreon. And for season 2, I got $70 per episode from Indiegogo. So not too shabby. I pay all of my guest voice actors $1 per line. I pay all of my guest writers $50 per episode. These are incredibly low rates. These are not what people are worth. But in my casting call, I made the rate clear. In my writer's call, I made the rate clear. I was like, this is what I can afford to pay you. And if it's too low, I genuinely wish you the best. But people did apply to write. People applied to, I guess, auditioned to voice act. And I had plenty of people to go with for either of them. I am not paid for anything I do for writing, acting, or sound design. And part of it is just, this is a show I want to exist and I want to make. And I'm not super invested in being paid for my own time. Like, sure, yeah, that would be great, but it's not the purpose of side questing. As far as just the characters thereof, each episode follows the main character named Ryan, another Ryan, who I voice primarily so I do not have to pay someone to voice that character. But every other character that Ryan meets is different for each episode. So each episode has more or less a unique cast. And so we meet a lot of people throughout side questing and we don't stay with them for a long time. So rarely, if ever, is the gender of the characters Ryan meets important. Usually I start writing and sometimes I'll get an idea of who I want to play that character and I'll just tailor from the get-go the gender of that character to match. I did this with Evan. But sometimes I'll just write that character and I'll listen to the pool of people I have who have auditioned for side questing and I'll find a voice that I like. And if I need to change the character to better match that actor, I will. Usually it's fine. When the character gender is important, which has happened a couple times. I think we had 2 episodes that they don't focus on gender, but they do. I say 2, I already thought of another 3 episodes where the gender of the character was very important and relevant to the story. And in that case, I just cast to match the character based on the information people gave me in the audition form. When I made my form for side questing, I asked for name, pronouns, I asked for race and gender, just so I had that information to use in casting so that I can make sure I could cast diversely, because every episode has a different character. So having a diverse cast is something I have to keep working at with every episode. I'm never done casting diversely because the cast of side questing is consistently ever growing and ever changing. And that's, I think, something kind of unique to the show, because it's not an anthology show, but the cast is different every episode. So it's kind of in a weird middle ground.
At some point, yeah. every indie actor in audio drama will have been in side questing.
That's the goal.
A lot of us. I think Sawyer's episode is one of the ones where the gender of the characters mattered, right? So
Yeah.
because that was part of the story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Side questing is how I met Tal. It was just that I ran into this show and adored it. I think I was I reviewed it fairly early on, and just talked about how it's a show you can trust to to never hurt your feelings, basically. And so I found it. I always liked it. It's a really fun show. But as I got to know Tal and how they were running it, there's also just a lot going on behind the scenes in side questing that I think is admirable, including all of their casting decisions and just sort of how they tailor the characters to match the actors is pretty lovely, and usually done in a way that's just, it's not central to the story, but it's still there and important.
Yeah, it was important to me to have a fantasy show that diverged from the classic fantasy show shenanigans of being super white and super straight and super cis. So I wanted to build a world that was very much still a fantasy world, but was a little bit more reflective of the world we're living in right now.
And you decided to also diverge from the end the hero has a magic sword and kills the dragon.
Oh. yeah. Side questing is just let's take fantasy and put it somewhere else and have fun with that. So it's a lot of its own thing, and I love that about it.
We did forget to actually describe the shows, although I guess for Light Hearts I did say Haunted Gay Bar, right? It's a sitcom.
Yeah. And side questing is a fantasy show about avoiding the main plot.
Right.
So. All right. Now when we go to This Planet Needs a Name, we'll remember to describe it as soon as I can figure out where my mouse is. There we go.
This Planet Needs a Name. I've already mentioned it at the top. This is my baby. I launched it a little over a year ago after being an avid listener and an audience member for a few years and kind of wishing I could get into audio drama as a creator. And then I went to Podtails. Some folks said really nice things about, like, what's your show? Followed by, are you sure you don't have a show? Followed by, I think you have a show. And this idea that I've been working on coalesced. I create it with an old friend and co-creator, Trace Callahan, who does all the sound things. I do all the word things and the people things. So between us, Trace and I are the co-creators of This Planet Needs a Name. It is a science fiction audio drama. It's deliberately, defiantly hopeful. It's a it's an ensemble cast with an initial ensemble of 7, which has just become, spoiler, 10 as of last episode. So we have this ensemble cast. It's a low budget production, but I always knew it would be funded in some way, but I had no idea if that'd be a lot. So at casting, I let everyone know I'd be launching a Patreon, but that I didn't know if we would be able to pay people ever. And essentially asked folks to consider it the community theater of podcasting, something that you do for fun and for love that might take a lot of energy, but you do it for those reasons. And so that was my approach, and I was brand new, just kind of, I've said before, I jumped and decided to see if I could learn to fly on the way down. And I got a gazillion auditions from people. And because I had a gender inclusive call, those folks were, well, I was going to say primarily queer. Everyone I cast was queer. It wasn't intentional. Like, I didn't even know that about some of them until well after casting. But that's how that happened. And I didn't do as good a job in casting inclusively in other ways because I was really new. But at some point I realized I was getting almost entirely white people. And I did a little bit of outreach to say, like, hey, I don't want to tell a white sci-fi story. And I'm also not going to put people in like digital blackface. So, I'm trying to solve this problem. And I don't really know how, because I also can't pay people. So I don't want to ask people to audition for something if I'm not going to be able to pay them, etc. And apparently being really honest about that is a good way to earn some people's trust, because folks came and auditioned. We are now at, I need to go check, $220 a month on Patreon. And we do profit sharing among the ensemble of all 10 of us. So although I say that, but Trace and I are both unpaid at this point. So it's really profit sharing among everyone who does not decline payment. So after the show's expenses are paid, and we also make a monthly community donation to a different organization that's related to justice, the cast as a whole agreed to that. So essentially after that, what's left is shared equally among the ensemble. It's not based on who I write more lines for or anything like that. Originally, we thought there might be a tiered system where if people contribute more to the show beyond acting, if they're helping more with story creation or social media or promotion, then they might get paid in a higher tier or something like that. It hasn't happened yet. I can't say it won't. If we ever make a lot of money, that might make sense. But so far, the cast as a whole has agreed that we like equality, and no one is worried about whether someone else is getting $25 when they're getting 30, or vice versa. So that's where that's at. I make those decisions. It's very much my show, but I make them with in consultation with my cast, and I am not going to, I've earned their trust over the last year and change. So we work pretty well as a group. Character identities were developed along with the actors. I said that at casting, I had a few sides, but none of them were completed characters. And that meant that right after casting, I would say, okay, here's what I know about the character I'd like you to play. You know, they are going to be doing this role within the story. And then thematically, this is what I need them to be like for the audience. This is what they're carrying for the show. What elements of your identity would you like to bring into this character? That's what I asked every single one of them. And then we had these really cool conversations about that. And that means that they decided things like their character's gender and orientation, race or ethnicity, cultural background, ability or disability. And it wasn't just match the character to the actor. It was very much up to the actor. So Caroline Makes, who plays Zahava, wanted to bring their Judaism in, but didn't want to bring in their deafness, or at least didn't say that at the outset, and we played with it a little bit later and decided not to make it a central part of Zahava's character. That was Caro's choice. If they had wanted to, we would have found a way to write it in. Similarly, Trace, my collaborator, plays a character. Trace is blind or low vision, and we wanted to bring that in and find a way to write it into science fiction that wasn't erase the disability with technology, but also wasn't like having the social model of disability still happening. Colian can't see with their eyes, but that does not mean that Colian is disabled in the same sense as somebody who can't see now. So creating those things was a huge writing challenge, a lot of fun. The point of this kind of work was being able to do that work with my ensemble. But it does mean that I write as we go, that my actors are continuing to help create story, that I credit them as co-writers. Like I say, characters were developed in collaboration with the actors, and that we're slow. Sometimes we were trying for like one episode a month, and we were trying for one episode every 2. I have a day job, and we spent 4 months without an episode at one point. And I don't love that. Like, I wish we were able to produce more quickly, but we're up against some very real, mostly me-based constraints. But that's our model, and I love our model, and I don't want to move away from it for this specific show. We also don't take any ad revenue, sponsorships, or network connections very deliberately. We've grown enough as a show that occasionally that comes up and people kind of ask why we're not, basically, why I don't seem to want to monetize this thing. And the answer to that is that it started as this collaborative community-based project, and I personally want it to stay there. We built a fan community around it. We have an ensemble that's pretty tight knit in a lot of ways, and we want to keep it that way. So that's very specific to this production. Our actual costs, like Tal mentioned, for things like Lighthearts has a lot of things that we're paying for anyway. So does this. I use my Zoom account that I pay for anyway. I, as a writer, wanted to own Scrivener. I script in Scrivener for This Planet Needs a Name. It lets me write a lot faster than I would otherwise. And my writing speed is our major limitation. Our Trace and I, so Trace does most of our music stuff and is also doing that in other settings. And so has a lot of those tools that they would have anyhow. So there's a lot of that where we're bringing in a lot of value that the show isn't necessarily paying for. But I would actually say that despite the fact that we're a low budget production, it was ambitious to assume I would be working with some pro tools and pro people without having to pay for them very much at the outset, and that is what I assumed. And while I think that this model is working for me and I love what we're doing with it, I genuinely would not recommend that it's how you start something, especially the first time you do something like this. It relies a lot on a ton of communication and a lot of trust. And I'm just really, really fortunate that I happened to find a bunch of folks at the gate who were all very willing to go along with me on this kind of mad journey and trust me and give a lot of themselves to these characters and this story for minimal. I mean, at some point we got to the point where I was like, yay, I'm paying for your Netflix subscription. And now I'm paying them a little more than that. And it's starting to feel like, for the actors at least, you know, they're getting financial compensation that is somewhere close to what they're worth, maybe. Not really, but at least closer than a lot of folks can manage in audio drama, I guess. I think of it as paying my actor subscriptions because they get a share every month, no matter what. But this is, I guess, the other piece of this where it connects to the marginalization piece is it was so important to me that we write science fiction that brought humanity with it, like all of humanity. And sci-fi, like fantasy, is traditionally very white, very male, very cis, very het. And I just didn't want that. And by bringing in actors from a lot of different backgrounds and then developing characters based on those actors, we created, I mean, just a lot of different identities. We have most flavors of queerness in there represented in some way. And Tal actually maintains some lists of shows with different kinds of queer representation. And we're on most of them. And that's,
yeah.
just
I think all, maybe.
We don't have anyone trans feminine in the show, which is just how that's an artifact of the casting. We didn't, I think maybe we had one person read who had that identity and they weren't a good match for any of the characters. So it was, but that was just a piece. You know, I accidentally cast 3 people who at the time were 19-year-old trans men. It wasn't, I didn't have all of that detail going in. I didn't ask them for that much detail about their identities. My approach in casting was to actually say, I mean, I asked for name and pronouns and stuff, but then I asked them for anything else they felt it was, any other aspects of their identity they felt were relevant to tell me. Because that was sort of one of the ways that I thought made sense to try to get that information without asking super directly. And then everyone just told me everything about themselves. So that worked. Had a fair amount to go
when
on.
I ask identity-based questions, I use Google Forms for casting, and I always just have short answer. So people have to put something because it's a required question, but they can use whatever terms and phrasing they want. I've had people been like, "I'm not sure," to my question of like, "What's your gender?" And I'm like, "Okay, great, thank you for telling me."
I can work with not sure. That's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess when it comes to, we really have talked about 3 different shows with 3 really different models that are all about trying to create stories that include diverse casts, marginalized perspectives, doing different kinds of storytelling. Honestly, side questing and Light Hearts are trying to do some similar things for being lighthearted and being places that you can go where everything will be resolved by the end of the episode. This Planet Needs a Name is attempting to tell a fairly epic story with a lot of, I like to say, it's part of the genre corner that is feelings in space against a vaguely drawn apocalyptic backdrop. There's a few of us out there. We're one of them. But all of these shows are our attempts to try to like create space where we get to tell our own stories on really limited budgets. I'm lucky that I've been able to self-fund enough and have enough patrons come on that we could afford a few, like our composer could afford some nice instruments, things like that. But as we talk, I'm like, I feel kind of bougie now. I'm actually paying for things a little bit more than I thought that I was. But yeah, those are all slightly different ways of doing the same thing, but it's very doable. It's absolutely something that if you have a story you want to tell and some people you want to tell it with, There's like no reason, if you have the time and energy to devote to it, because that's the one piece that we can't make free. The rest of it, those tools do exist. And people like Tal, who will help you figure out how to use them. And me, but Tal's better at it, exist.
I try. All right. So I love our question slide for recording, in which there's no one to ask us questions but for each other.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any questions.
I was going to, but we kept answering things as we went.
Yeah.
Tal, I do have a sound design question, kind of. How do you decide when you're going to do your own Foley versus when you're going to download something that already exists? What's that process?
Oh, that's a really good question. No one's asked me that one before. The first question on the table is, can I do this? So like when I'm doing sci-fi sound design, usually the answer is no, and it's solved from the get-go. For something like side questing, it's a little more up in the air. I know the sounds I have and have downloaded, so I already have a good idea of if I have something, I'm going to use it. And then from there, if it's something I can do, usually I'll poke around on Freesound just to see what exists. Because if there's the perfect sound, it'll save me a lot of time. But then it just kind of comes down to how much time do I think it will take me to find this sound versus how much time do I think it will take me to make it. So for Light Hearts, I actually it's where I do most of my own Foley, because a lot of it is grabbing a glass or putting something down, or like someone's buying a pastry and I am like, I can walk over to my closet with a cup and pick it up and put it down 10 times and get the sound I need. Or I can take this bag I got when I bought a bagel the other day and just rustle it in front of the camera, the mic, and have it. So it just kind of comes down to like how much time I think it will take, and also how lazy I'm feeling, because sometimes I'm sitting at my couch doing sound design. I'm like, okay, I need the sound of some clothes rustling. I'm like, I don't want to get up, so I just go and look for clothes rustling sounds. And sometimes it'll take a little bit longer, but I'm just like, I don't want to get up.
And there are some sounds that are genuinely hard to find, right? So like I've done a fair amount of like looking around on Freesound, and now I also will swear about door sounds, because they're just, you need doors and there just aren't so many. Or I was looking for sounds of essentially people's bodies touching, hands and stuff like that. That stuff's also hard to come by to have that sounds good. So I get that sometimes those sounds don't exist in the way that you want them to, and you have to make them. But I have been curious ever since I got to hear you attempting to pour liquid to sound correct.
It's so hard.
In your closet. I've been like, I wonder what makes them do that versus, you know what I mean? Like where that comes down.
Yeah. For this one, there's some stuff like with, oh, go ahead.
No, just for this one, it username Trace does almost all of the Foley and almost never uses a downloaded sound. But I think that's just because they like to. I don't think it's like, I'm not sure. I haven't asked like why. So.
Yeah, sometimes things sound very specific, like pouring from a pitcher sounds different than pouring from a cup, or like filling a wine glass is different than filling a plastic cup. And for Light Hearts, I want specific sounds because it's like, it's slice of life. I want it to sound very down to earth. Like these are all things people could hear in their daily life. And so I want it to be accurate. Whereas like side questing, it's fantasy. It's not that important because I can wave my hands and be like magic and we're good. So it's different.
As a not sound designer, who's just, I'm incredibly fortunate. I say, like, if you're an indie, you wear all the hats. I don't. I have been incredibly lucky that Trace said yes to making a podcast baby with me, and is a composer who picked up sound design pretty quickly, who does like all of, and then I've been lucky to work with Tal on a couple projects and work with Brad. Basically, I work with these awesome sound designers, and I just try really hard to give them good food in the form of scripts. So they'll keep coming back because I'm not good at the thing that they're good at. I've done it and I'm not good at it. So I guess that is also a piece if you're starting up something, is just knowing where your limitations are and what you might, like who you might know, who might you be able to work with, that kind of thing. And feel free to define your scope small to start with. Like, you do not have to launch a huge show. I think side questing was probably a really good way to start because it was, you were the only person you had to be able to rely on that first season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's intentionally written to expand or shrink as I need it to. So I can have an episode with 10 other actors, and I can have an episode that's me and my sibling, and both work. And like, that's all very intentional, let me tell you. I think it's really funny that we were both like, yeah, you should probably write your scripts up front. And then all of the 3 shows we brought up are/were written as as we go. Season 3 of Side Questing is not going to be written as we go because I am doing too many other shows now.
Side questing is also a really good example of starting out as a fairly narrow scope hobby, getting larger and getting more professional as you go. So that is a thing that has happened. And that you've also gone from, this would be a fun thing to do, to Tal sound designs everything, to Tal produces everything. So, and I, again, as I mentioned, there's skills I have and don't have. When I say I'm mostly a writer and director, that's what I'm good at.
You're so good at it.
Thank you. I'm a crap producer. So it's really good if I get to have someone to work with who's better at things like keeping us to task and on schedule. Tal does that. And it's the reason why Caro and I voted them executive producer of Light Hearts. We are all equals, but we have different titles.
Yep. Yeah.
But I feel like I didn't know starting out where I would land. I thought I'd want to act. I like acting, but what I really love is writing neat things and then directing people and doing a little more active direction than most audio drama, I think, does. It really, different shows handle it differently. But I don't do what people call like voice directing, where I'm there for recording and coaching line by line. We do scene direction where we do rehearsals and do feedback and interpretation. And then I trust actors to do their thing. But I love doing it and it's really fun for me. And the actors who like working with me also love it. So they enjoy it and then they come back and work with me more. And I love that piece of all of this. So I'm just incredibly grateful that there are people out there whose specialties are different from mine, who will keep working with me, because by myself, I can write a script and cast it and direct it. And I can do a dialogue edit. You know, I can do some pretty basic audio engineering. So all of the people at least sound like they're, you know, in the same room. But that's about the limit of my abilities. And my attempts, like I've sound designed a couple scenes just to see if I could, and I could get better at it, but I didn't like it. Like I didn't enjoy that. And if you don't enjoy it, it's a lot. So I just think knowing what you're likely to both enjoy and be good at is pretty important, because if you're trying to make a low budget show, what that mostly means is you're not paying yourself.
Yep.
And
there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's so much discussion about what's indie and what's non-indie. And honestly, are you paying yourself a rate worth your time might be the definition.
It's certainly right up there, although you could say that's just a very successful indie, but there aren't a ton of people that fall in that category. You're probably, if you're doing a low budget show, you're probably not paying yourself anything like what you're worth, if you're paying yourself at all. And I just think for me, that's not why I'm in it. So I want these stories to exist. So I want to make them, and I want to find other people who want to make them and help them, which I guess it comes back to this. Do you have questions? Here are how you contact us thing that we have on the slide right now. Both of us actually do a fair amount of trying to make sure that new folks get connected, get to resources, and in particular, people who are from communities whose voices aren't heard. We both care a whole lot about making sure that you're able to find the people that you need to know in order to start doing the work you want to do. You don't have to be like, hey, guess what? I'm going to just jump and learn to fly and hope some people come with me. You really can join on someone's project and see if you like this, and find people out there who are going to want to work with you. So,
yeah, you can I presume either or both of us on Twitter randomly with a question. And if we can help you, we probably will.
Yes.
If you don't seem rude, both of us will be like, yes. Let me tell you what I know.
Sure, I would love to help. I, in particular, this comes down to the writer-director thing. I tend to have kind of pockets full of actors. And Tal, because of side questing, also has a lot of actors, but I just have a lot of folks who are usually relatively new voice actors, not always, but people who are just sort of trying to get some work. I've worked with them a little bit. I'd like to work with them more. If I've ever worked with them and I'm willing to tell you to work with them, that means they were lovely. So I'm really happy as people are sort of casting. If you write a casting call that is genuinely inclusive, I will share it with that network of my pockets full of actors. And a lot of them are excellent. And that's one way that we can kind of help get that word out and get you people. If you're writing those characters and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to write a trans person of color and cast them, I'll be like, guess what? Yes. I can find you a small selection of folks to read for that role. And I think that we both kind of serve that purpose a little bit of trying to make sure that folks get connected to opportunities and to each other. So, yeah. It's the stuff that if you want it to happen, you have to make it happen. And the barriers to publication for almost every form of media are too high.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you had something else.
No, the great thing about our plan for going as long as we need to on each slide meant that we hit everything.
Yeah, we talked about all the things.
You don't give a time limit.
When we do this next week, we're going to have to do it in 20 minutes with 10 minutes for questions, which means it will be a much shorter version. If you've already watched that and you're watching this, I hope this was an interesting expansion of the topics that we'll be hitting in a couple of minutes.
This was our practice. The test run.
Well, thank you for your time.
I think it was good.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. I could sit and talk to you for days.
That has been a thing in our relationship. Yes. Always find yourself somebody that you love getting work done with and also love talking about your cats with. It's really good.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let us know if you have any questions.
Yep.